One of my core memories growing up was getting a birthday gift from my grandmother, a Game Boy Color bundled with the greatest video game ever, Sunsoft's Looney Tunes. Okay, objectively, it's not the greatest video game ever, but it was the best game that a young me had ever played. Now, as an adult with decades of experience with the medium, I have a better sense for what can make a game compelling: depth, artistry, storytelling. Looney Tunes didn't have any of this. But as a kid, I didn't look at it with a critical eye. It was the first video game that I had ever played, and I sunk hours and hours into it, though I never did beat the Speedy Gonzalez level. This video is about the games that I played in 2025. I want to talk about the things that I love, and before I can do that, I have to talk about where my love for games came from. That mediocre Game Boy game sparked a lifelong passion. The next year, I begged my parents for a Nintendo 64 because my neighbor Jack had one, and it was incredible. You can imagine the emotional roller coaster that I experienced that Christmas, seeing a big home console-sized box under the tree, and opening it to find a PlayStation 1. I swore I would never forgive my mom, but in retrospect, I'm very happy that I got that console, because it featured many of the games that I look back on most fondly. In particular, Final Fantasy IX, not only my favorite game of all time, but my favorite piece of media ever. Final Fantasy IX was the first game that I played that was truly story-driven. It was a whopping 4 discs long and featured very complex themes of existentialism, nihilism, and grief. The games I played on my Game Boy and my other PS1 games were fun, but this was the first game to make me feel things. I won't go on too much of a Final Fantasy IX tangent now, perhaps that's a video I'll make in the future, but the point is, this game showed me how deeply I could be invested in the experience of an interactive narrative. For the subsequent decades, scarcely had a week gone by without me playing some kind of video game. I had a PS2, actually I had 3 of them because I used them so much that the disk drives burnt out. I had an Xbox 360, getting my Steam account in 2010 was a game changer, but as time went on, the ways that I engaged with video games changed. Fast forward to 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic had put me on furlough from my job, and I had just started streaming on Twitch the year before. Much of my free time was spent playing games in front of an audience, which I got hooked on. In a time of global isolation, this was the closest thing that I had to inviting friends over to play games on the couch. If I had a game I was eager to play, I would wait to do it on stream, which was easy to do when I didn't have a job and could hardly leave my apartment. But the world reopened, and by necessity, my schedule adjusted to streaming 2 or 3 days a week. To finish a lengthy game on stream might take me a month or more, but I still had some chunks of time off stream, an hour here, an afternoon there, that I might be able to spend playing games. Well, I couldn't play my stream games, I wouldn't want to make progress without the community there to be involved, so I turned much of my time toward easy games. Not easy in the sense of difficulty, but in terms of the mental load that the game demanded of me. I think a very good example of this is Hearthstone's Battlegrounds mode, an auto-battler where you take your turn, buy your minions, and then wait for the round to play out automatically before moving on to the next. I could tune in for 30 seconds at a time, then tune out for the next 2 minutes and scroll on my phone. It became a passive activity. Or I would revisit games that I was familiar with, stay in my comfort zone, not commit too hard to whatever I was doing. I want to be clear that I don't think this is a bad thing. I don't think games like this are fundamentally wrong, nor am I judging people who play this way. But for me, I found that I was relying on this experience and other similar ones more as a time killer than as a passion. Was I having fun? Sure. But I wasn't finding myself engaged. I was in what I have come to call my shutdown cycle of work, stream, kill time, and turn my brain off. And I never really got the chance to enjoy the depth and personal connection of a hobby that used to captivate me. That brings me into 2025. Early in the year, I really became aware of how deep into that cycle I was. And I became aware of it because of the games that I chose to play, and realized how deeply I could invest into them again. Many of the games that I want to discuss released in 2025, but not all of them did. My year began with a game from 2009. I had actually tried Dragon Age Origins a number of times in the past few years. I've completed the various character origin scenarios and the first chapter half a dozen times or so, but time and time again, I would just bounce off of it. I'm not sure what it was that prompted me to try it again last winter, but I do know what changed this time. When I started the game, I changed my approach. I chose to play a dwarf commoner, Ivo, a social outcast who starts the game under the thumb of a local crime lord. Ivo was a bitter and surly man, eager to climb out of poverty and rise to glory. Ivo was practical, cynical, and slow to trust. I let Ivo take the wheel and make choices for me, and that was a bit tough because I like to optimize to get everything possible out of a game, to see it all, get all the loot, complete all the content with the best possible ending to every storyline. Choosing to immerse myself into the mind of this character, to really play the role of Ivo in this role-playing game really made a huge difference in how I engaged with it. For a great example of this, there is a point relatively early in the story where your party is beset by assassins while traveling. After you beat them, the leader pleads for his life and says he'll give up the person who hired him and join your party if you let him live. To any player familiar with the genre, it's clear that this is an opportunity to recruit a new party member, and therefore the correct decision is to spare him and recruit him. Ivo wouldn't just forgive this man, a hired sword who had attempted to assassinate him minutes before. Ivo struck him down. The choices that I made throughout the game had consequences, and that meant a more interesting, engaging, and personal story. I didn't reload when the outcome wasn't what I wanted. I made the choice that Ivo would make and accepted the result. And I think that this heightened the stakes in a way that finally let me connect with this game. By February, I had sunk 111 hours into the game as I walked into the finale, and those are hours that really meant something. I think back on the experience and it brings me a smile to think about how the land of Ferelden was shaped by the choices that I made, or that Ivo made. Moving on from this marathon of a game, the next major highlight of my year came from a much more modest title. My wife is not a gamer. We've played a handful of games together. As I record this, she is partway through a secondhand copy of Hogwarts Legacy, which is her most complex game to date. She doesn't really love games with conflict and failure states. Combat stresses her out, and that isn't really balanced by the catharsis of victory. Still, just like I try to share my passion for games with my audience, so too do I look for opportunities to share my passion with the most important person in my life. Blanc was a perfect fit. Blanc is a two-player cooperative puzzle adventure game where you take on the role of a fawn or a wolf cub respectively. The puzzles are simple, the stakes are relatively low, and it's a cozy, bite-sized experience. Whereas the last game that I discussed clocked over 100 hours, Blanc clocked in at a whopping 1 hour and 56 minutes. During the short runtime, I felt myself deeply engrossed into the simple world of Blanc. The entire game is rendered in this stunning charcoal drawing, black and white aesthetic. And the vibes are just cute and comfy, pure and simple. Sliding around on ice or sledding down a snowy hill alongside my best friend was just a pure expression of joy. And without any words, the story still managed to touch the two of us, prompting both of us at times to go, "Aww," or "Oh no!" And while the puzzles weren't brain-bending, there were still a few that took us longer than we'd like to admit, and led to a very satisfying aha moment. I think that puzzle games can be very hit and miss for people, but for the sake of breaking me out of my shutdown cycle, Blanc really helped me get into the mindset to focus on a dive back into the video game space with open arms. And having someone to play alongside me didn't hurt either. Speaking of which, 2025 saw the rise of what the internet has taken to calling friend slop games, which is a term that, while evocative, I find uniquely incorrect. Much like how Blanc was a very short experience crafted to enjoy an afternoon with a friend, a lot of the friend slop games are designed with the expectation of simple, low-stakes fun, and they are fun. I have had 1,000 laughs watching a mission go catastrophically wrong in R.E.P.O, and Buckshot Roulette is perfect for my friend group.
You know what? I like my odds.
The term friend slop comes off as derisive, giving the impression that these games are less than, inferior, not worth your time, but I prefer to think of them as purpose-made, small bursts of fun. They're party games, and they serve that role very well. Nobody goes to a board game night and then calls the Cards Against Humanity friend slop. However, there were a few multiplayer games that truly sucked me in during 2025. Rabbit and Steel is an indie game that I can best describe as combining Final Fantasy XIV raids and Touhou with a roguelike twist and a cute pastel bunny girl aesthetic. The game consists of several zones, each with 3 unique mini-bosses and a boss that combines those individual mechanics. With every victory, you get the opportunity to collect loot or buy gems that radically alter your playstyle. The game can be played with anywhere from 1 to 4 players, with the mechanics and patterns of the bosses adjusting to the number of players participating. The more players you add, the more complex it becomes, but with practice and familiarity comes expertise. And eventually, what once seemed impossibly chaotic suddenly becomes a beautifully choreographed dance. You learn together how to read the moves, start to remember the patterns, and enter a zen state where you weave between attacks flawlessly. This is a game that takes patience, practice, and sometimes a bit of luck, but the payoff is incredibly worth it. There is no feeling better than finally overcoming the boss that has killed you over and over and over again. This game just had a new update about a month ago at time of recording with new bosses, new enemies, and new playable characters. I highly recommend that you go check it out. I talked earlier about how part of my shutdown cycle was only playing the games that I was familiar with, and games that were in my comfort zone. Well, a friend of mine directed me to Absalom, a side-scrolling beat-em-up roguelike. I have never been a beat-em-up fan, but I am a fan of spending time with my friends, so I gave it a go. And honestly, it was a really great time. The diversity of builds, the different characters, the snappy and responsive control scheme were enough for me to overcome my aversion to the genre and give it my full attention. Even though I had written the genre off as not for me, letting myself be open to the new experience led to some of the most fun that I had with a game all year. Except for that stupid Lizard King. Oh my god, I hate him so Elden Ring Nightreign is the third of the major multiplayer games that sucked me in during the year, and the one that I think ate the most hours. Just like the others, I adored the journey of starting off not knowing anything at all, slowly learning how to optimize, and then reaching a point where you can reliably end with a cracked build and make it to or defeat the final boss. It's a bizarre experience to be sure, mashing together a bunch of FromSoft's repertoire and dropping it in a Fortnite circle. I didn't have high expectations when it came out, and I think many people didn't, but it ended up being crafted in such a way that just one more run became the mantra for months. Now, these 3 games are roguelikes, and I acknowledge that it can be very easy for those to fall back into the shutdown cycle, but with these games, because it was with friends, it never felt like wasted time. It was more like social time that happened to be spent gaming, and I rarely, if ever, touch these games on my own. Now, I did stream some Nightreign during that year, but I would estimate only about 10% of my playtime was in front of an audience. There is one game which I want to talk about that I did stream in its entirety. Dark Souls needs no introduction. The game is a genre-defining work that made FromSoft a household name. Dark Souls 1 was actually my second FromSoft game following Elden Ring a couple of years ago. Transitioning from the much more modern and fluid Elden Ring into playing the relatively stiff and clunky Dark Souls, I wasn't sure if it would land for me, and of course playing it entirely on stream makes it a different experience than the other ones in this video. I wasn't playing it for me, I was playing it for an audience. So why am I talking about it here? Well, Dark Souls was a game that really helped me return to a place of creative expression. For the first time ever, I saved the recordings of my gameplay and decided to make highlight videos. It took me a whole lot longer than I expected, and I had put in so many hours of work trying to learn how the software that I used functioned. But at the end of the day, the result is something that I'm very proud of. It gave me motivation in my downtime, gave me something to channel my attention toward, and kept the shutdown cycle at bay. It made me want to commit more to my YouTube channel, maybe to make content specifically for the channel. In a way, Dark Souls is the reason that this video exists. It's refreshing to feel so enamored with the video game space that I'm actually inspired to create. The link to that playlist is in the description, and I really appreciate every view and comment on those videos. They brighten my day more than I can say. Of course, no conversation about gaming in 2025 is complete without The Hollow Knight franchise holds a special place in my heart. When I started streaming, the only game that I streamed for nearly 2 years was Fate Grand Order, a mobile gacha game. It was only with the pandemic lockdown that I started to branch out and try other things. Hollow Knight was the first game I played on stream, and I absolutely lost myself to it. Hollow Knight instantly became a favorite of mine, so you can imagine my elation when I finished the game in spring of 2020 and learned there was a sequel right around the corner. Yeah. That was a long wait. And as the years passed, the hype mounted and expectations grew. Eventually, they hit a critical mass where it seemed like no matter what Team Cherry did, it couldn't possibly meet the standard that the fans had set for it. And then, it kinda did. Silksong is a rare type of sequel in my eyes that strikes the perfect balance between innovating on the foundation set by its predecessor without straying too far from the qualities that made it incredible in the first place. Silksong feels snappier, sharper, faster. It adapts the feeling of playing the game to what Hornet should feel like, distinct from the movement patterns and combat styles of the Knight. The environmental designs, enemy movesets, and boss fights all had to undergo a metamorphosis in design philosophy in order to accommodate this, but none of that detracts from the core experience of playing a Hollow Knight game. The world is crafted with such care that every time I rounded a corner, I felt rewarded for it. The tools and crests helped to keep the gameplay fresh, and the boss design is, on the whole, remarkably fun. Sure, there are some clunkers, looking at you, savage beastfly, but for every Moss Mother there was a Lace. And of course, I have to shout out my boy Sherma. Above all else, it was the setting of Silksong that took hold of me. Learning more about the world, discovering lore, and piecing together bit by bit what led to Pharloom's decay was an ever-compelling hook. And the deeper I got, the more I could see that this was a game that had something to say. At the outset, it might not seem obvious, but the deeper you go, the more clear it becomes that this game was carefully crafted with some very specific themes in mind, which it communicates through the environment. It trusts the player enough to piece those things together and let them understand firsthand what the game is trying to say, a theme that is going to carry on to my second favorite game of the entire year. Blueprints is my favorite type of thing. A thing that cannot be easily boiled down to its core components without sounding patently absurd. 1 year ago, a puzzle-based architectural roguelike would have sounded like something out of Mad Libs, and yet that bizarre description was exactly how the game was first sold to me, and it is, in my eyes, one of the greatest achievements in the medium of video games. If I got lost in Silksong, then Blueprints straight up kidnapped me and dumped me in another country, specifically in Fen Ares. Now is probably a good time to give a light spoiler warning. Most of the games here I've avoided saying or showing much that would be spoilers, but the nature of Blueprints makes it difficult to discuss without revealing to a new player some bit of information that could otherwise have been found organically. I will still avoid openly spoiling puzzles, but if you would rather avoid any foreknowledge whatsoever, now is a good time to skip to the timestamp on screen. I found the tile placing and the roguelike elements of the game fun, and reaching room 46 for the first time was a big celebration for me. But what makes the game truly special is its staggering depth and thoughtfulness. In contrast to what I said about Blanc's more simple puzzle design earlier, Blueprints features a much more dynamic range of puzzles. Some of them are very simple and intuitive. I recall the first safe that I ever found, which I opened within 45 seconds of discovery. Other puzzles require you to perform very specific actions, which may have a prerequisite, such as carrying a specific item or drafting a certain combination of rooms, or both. In other roguelites, the progression of the game may be done by accumulating a meta currency that you spend between runs for permanent upgrades. Such a thing does exist in Blueprints, in fact there are several, but the true meta currency is knowledge. At a certain point, the goal of the game ceases to be winning the run, i.e. getting to room 46, and it becomes solving the puzzles, or uncovering the secrets. And doing so is going to require you to pay attention and use every ounce of brain power that you have. And yet, the puzzles rarely feel unfair or unapproachable. One particular early game puzzle tasks you with entering a piece of information into a computer. That piece of information can be found via at least 4 different methods, but they only jump out at you when you know what to look for. The sheer breadth of available mysteries to solve means that the relevant details are all around you, all the time, and you only really realize it once you start to know what to look for. What starts as you doing basic true-false logic puzzles and elementary school arithmetic culminates in you deciphering the meanings of complex mathematical sequences and piecing together the history of the entire setting. And this is where Blueprints is elevated in my eyes from merely an outstanding game to a masterpiece. As you delve further and further into the mysteries of the Manor, the information that is required to progress becomes more and more tied to the history of the world, to its geography, its inhabitants, politics, and languages. The game doesn't just ask you to acknowledge that these things are present, it demands that you understand them. And in doing so, it subtly weaves the narrative that exists in the background directly into the themes and experiences at the forefront. When you reach the endgame, suddenly the entire game and everything in it are completely recontextualized. In order to succeed, you are forced to actively consider the impact of historical revisionism, censorship, and cultural erasure. This game is intensely cerebral, evocative, and thought-provoking, and its bizarre premise serves as a hook to pull you into a game with a truly staggering depth to it. To tie it back to what this video is about, I fundamentally could not have appreciated this game and played it to full completion unless I had broken out of my shutdown cycle, and I am so happy that I did. So with all that praise that I just heaped onto Blueprints, why is it only my second favorite game of the year? Well, this probably won't come as a surprise. I actually started Clair Obscur Expedition 33 as a stream game. I had heard excellent things about it and I wanted to see what the hype was about. After the opening sequence, I told my viewers that I would not continue streaming this game. I could see already what a special, heartfelt, and personal game this was, and I wanted to experience it on my own terms. The next day, I booted up Clair Obscur and it became the only thing on my mind for weeks. The JRPG has always been my favorite genre. Going back to Final Fantasy IX, I've always adored turn-based battles, the process of getting experience and leveling up, and the unique party members with diverse abilities and aesthetics. Expedition 33 even echoes my favorite game of all time, with the Lumina system very closely resembling Final Fantasy IX's R.E.P.O system. Landing a perfect chain of parries on a complex boss combo gave me a dopamine rush to rival Sekiro's parry system. Each character has a wide build potential. I personally was partial to a full-on lightning spam setup for Looney, and the weapon's unique passive abilities offer even more ways for a player to tailor-make a build to their own personal tastes. But while the gameplay was fun and inspired, I think most people would agree that it is not what makes Expedition 33 stand out. In my view, it can't be boiled down to just one thing. The visuals, the music, the direction, the cinematography, the writing, if I wanted to list every excellent aspect of this game, we would be here all day. Instead, I want to talk about the impact this game had on me. I started Expedition 33 at 30 years old. Not quite old enough to be gammaged yet, thankfully, but enough to start feeling, well, old. As I left my 20s behind, my thoughts began to drift to the subject of time. How had I been using my time? Had it been valuable, or was I just wasting my time and watching it drift away? And as I watched the establishing sequence for the first time, watched Sophie drift away, leaving Gustave behind, alone on the dock, I felt like I was looking into a mirror.
Art can be a window, and art can be a mirror. And great art is both.
This line comes from one of the central characters in the story, and it is a line that I think is incredibly revealing. Though the exact meaning of this line is particular to the context that it's given in, I think it demonstrates precisely what the creative team behind the game wanted to achieve: to create a work that serves as a way to reflect on humanity. As a window, this story asks you to open yourself up to the incredible range of human emotions. It is very easy to undercut the emotional moment with a quippy joke or a surprise cut to an action sequence, but what makes Expedition 33 stand out is that it respects the audience enough not to do that. The emotional moments of this game, and there are many, are all given the time that they need to let the audience engage with deep and sincere emotional vulnerability. All the moments of exuberance, of anger, resentment, grief. For the first time in years, I had a game that made me genuinely, openly weep. I had finally had permission, had finally given myself permission to exist 100% in the moment. And of course, as a mirror, this piece of art gave me the chance to reflect on myself. Time marches onward, and whether we all like it or not, the metaphorical clock is ticking down on all of us. The game evolves past its initial conceit and ends up being about more than just that particular idea, but that was the thing that stuck with me on a personal level. How was I using the precious time that I had been given? I don't want to say it had been wasted, but I came to realize just how much I had been missing. All of these games that I've discussed, all of the experiences that I had throughout the year, took me to a place that I hadn't been in ages. I wasn't just filling time between obligations, I was thinking about these worlds while I was away from them. I was excited to talk about them, to share them, to create things because of them, to feel the same magic that first hooked me as a kid, sitting on the floor with a Game Boy. I still feel like I'm in my 30s, but it doesn't feel so old anymore. I've played more games since then, games outside my comfort zone, and maybe I'll talk about some of them in the future. For now, I want to thank everybody who watches the channel and watches my Twitch streams. I started streaming in the first place because I wanted to share my passion and enthusiasm for something that I really love, and your support has meant the world to me. I have started a Patreon, and I want to shout out the people who have made this possible. I appreciate you, and I hope that 2026 brings you the joy, passion, and love that 2025 brought me. Goodbye!